Pale Fire is a modernist work by many categories, but also is argued by many to be a postmodernist work. And I want to talk about that claim that postmodernism has. What is postmodern about it? It is a piece of art that reflects on the process of making art. It is metafictional in this way, um, and where truth is about a series of retreating layers of reality. Now, people who don't like this and who don't like postmodernism and don't like Pale Fire will say the problem here, what they don't like is this: is it keeps you out of the reality. It keeps you from just kind of sinking back and forgetting it. It takes you too far and alienates you far from the reality. Let me make the case for postmodernism. First of all, three parts. One, first of all, what do you mean reality? It's a work of fiction. What you're objecting to, if you're one of those objectors, what those people object to is not the uh, the disruption of reality, it's the disruption of the illusion of reality. They want a more illusionistic fiction, which a work like Pale Fire refuses to be, although it is perfectly capable of the full depth and detail of the best illusionistic realistic feature of fiction. It is incredibly good at doing all those things that realistic fiction can do, but it also steps back and makes you reflect and actually takes you out of it, takes you away from the identification. That is actually not a flaw. That is not a flaw. That is not a bug. That is a feature. The reality it is breaking up is not real. And postmodernism is opposed to the idea that you should take fictions as real. When you take fictions as real too far, you move into lying, or like our boy Kinboat, paranoid delusion. If you haven't noticed, he has paranoid delusions because he's paranoid and delusional. Secondly, art, as postmodernists point out, and it's kind of observably true, is not based on life. It is not drawn directly from life, or only very rarely drawn directly from life. Oh, it's a real exception. Art is actually made from previous art, not simply by the writers, but by the readers. You understand art because you have internalized a set of genres, conventions, tropes, cliches that recognize when the story's over, when it's not. I mean, this is true. This is true in all kinds of formats. You are cued. There's a set of culturally shared norms that tell you what a story is, what a novel is, what a movie is, what's a satisfying ending, etc., etc. Because art is built on other art, it can be enormously fake. The enemy of these conventions are themselves not about reality per se, and distance ourselves, and this makes us further and further distant from reality. Postmodernism forces you to reflect on how art is made, to actually ground you in what is really happening. What is really happening when you read a novel is not any of the things described in the novel, but the art, the act of creating and interpreting the novel. The act of artistic creation and interpretation is what the novel's about, because that's what actually happens when you write one and then read one. That's all that happens. The other stuff is like, so thinking about that is a way of keeping things honest. Finally, postmodernism feels that it is perhaps, let me rephrase this. Nabokov's version of postmodernism suggests that it is morally wrong to identify uncritically with a work of fiction. To simply lose yourself in that dream is wrong and can lead you to all kinds of stuff. If you look at the kinds of art shade and Kinboat-like, neither of them particularly revolutionary in their tastes. Kinboat's is more romantic, sentimental, traditional, 19th century, all things that are being mocked, are being made fun of. Pale Fire is interested in you being an adult and reading through the illusion and thinking through how these illusions are made. Now, it's not, should every novel be like this? Maybe not. But those conventions can become BS very carefully. Believing something is real when it is only conventional is the opposite of apprehending reality. It takes you further from reality. Nabokov famously said in an afterword to one of his other novels, reality is the only word that belongs inside quotation marks. That reality is a question of the imagination. We do not live in the world. We live in our perception of the world. And reflecting on that perception is perhaps the only thing that can make us responsible moral agents. Nabokov is all about breaking down shop-worn conventions, cliches. He loathes cliches like he loathes almost nothing else. And he's a hater. I have to do a very short video, but like he is very clear about his like deep antipathies, right? Which are range of he hates Picasso, he hates music, he hates Sigmund Freud. Oh, he hates Sigmund Freud. He hates Nazis. Hating Nazis is good, right? But he hates shop-worn conventions. He hates bullshit. Postmodernism is about cleaning out the reliance of bullshit in art and making you face the reality of what is actually happening when you read and when a writer writes, of what is actually going on. By dealing with the techniques of fiction making itself. Now, this is one of this postmodern reflection on the process is one of the ways Nabokov tries to get you past convention. He uses two other techniques. Not all some postmodernism, it can be outright cartoony or whatever. Nabokov also uses the treasured techniques of the 19th century realist novel. And as I said in an earlier video, I don't mean realistic. He doesn't mean realist in the loose sense, in that like there's not a flying monkey in the story, that physics is nominally the laws of physics are nominally obeyed. That is not enough to be realism. There are many, many works that are set and are objectively observable phenomenal universe and obey the laws of physics, but are deeply unrealistic, right? Because nobody in New York has an apartment that size, because that's not how people act, because that relationship isn't, I don't believe, like, that is fundamentally false. A lot of things that are realistic in the loose sense are fundamentally false, and Nabokov really hates them. What real realism does, genuine realism, is observe things so closely, including the ugly nastiness, to give you to break through the fog of convention and all the BS, and let you perceive the world in a bright, precise, lucid way. Even Kinboat, who is deranged and delusional, can actually see things. He can describe that garden in loving Nabokovian detail. We can see he can describe lots of things with this incredible precision, including the banality and the awfulness. That is part of realism too. It is about prettying things up. The classic kind of French realist novels are about like, let's talk about like what it's actually like to be poor in Paris. Let's talk not about how the world ought to be in an idealizing way or romanticized, but let's talk about like just the gritty stuff. That grit, the hair left over in the bathroom from Shade's Lodger's Nocturnal Visitor, that level of grit, that is realism. And that is one of the other techniques that Nabokov combines with this kind of postmodern reflection on the process to kind of get you past. Third one is humor. One of the great ways to bust out cliches and conventions is to mock them. Humor has long been a kind of intellectual corrective to all kinds of folly and BS. And Nabokov, as you see, can be very, very, very funny. He's never written a book without some substantial jokes, and the jokes can be fairly ruthless because the jokes aren't there to actually make you happier. The jokes are there to tear away some of the bullshit.